We're about to dive into the legal world of ancient Rome. It's a system that defined everything power, status, your family in ways that are honestly both shockingly alien to us and, you might be surprised, still incredibly influential today. So, to get a sense of just how different their world was, let's just start with this one question. And believe it or not, for a huge chunk of Roman history, the answer was yes. That one single shocking fact tells you everything you need to know about a world built on absolute authority. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack. So, here's our game plan. We'll start with the core concept of power, then look at the two legal statuses that defined literally everyone. From there, we'll take a deep dive into the lives of slaves and children under Roman law. And finally, we'll connect it all back to why any of this ancient stuff still matters. Okay, so to really get Roman law, you have to grasp this one single core idea. Your entire life, your rights, your identity, everything was defined by your legal relationship to power. I mean, it's that simple, but also that huge. You were either in control or you were controlled. And this wasn't just, a social thing. It was the fundamental legal division of their entire world. Black and white. So, what did this look like in practice? Well, the Romans had specific legal terms for this, and understanding them is really the key to unlocking their whole social structure. As you can see, there were two big categories. On one side, you've got sui juris, which literally means of one's own right. These are your legal masters. And then on the other side, you've got alieni juris, subject to another's jurisdiction. And this covered almost everybody else, slaves, children, even a lot of adult women. Now, being alieni juris meant you're under one of two major forms of power. The first kind of power was called dominia potestas, and this was the absolute, total authority a master held over a slave. It was a relationship of pure ownership. The second type of power, and this one is so uniquely Roman, was patria potest. This was the lifelong power of the male head of the family, the pater familias, over every single one of his descendants. Now, we're going to dig into that in a bit, but first, let's stick with that most extreme form of legal control: slavery. In early Roman law, a slave wasn't legally a person at all. But over hundreds of years, that status began to slowly, and I mean slowly, shift. And this slide, wow, it really lays out just how complete that lack of personhood was. A slave was legally classified as a thing. The Latin word is res. As you can see, they couldn't legally marry, couldn't own property. They had zero standing in court. If someone hurt a slave, it wasn't assault on a person. It was just damage to the master's property. Their very life was in the master's hands. But, and this is important, this brutal system wasn't set in stone. As this timeline shows, things did reluctantly start to change. Under the Emperor Claudius, if a master abandoned a sick slave, that slave became free. The Lex Petronia stopped masters from just sending slaves to fight wild animals for fun. And later, Hadrian flat out banned masters from killing their slaves. Each of these was a small crack in the wall, a slow, grinding shift from being just a thing towards being a person. Now, a really key idea here was something called the peculium. This was basically a small bit of property a master allowed a slave to manage. Now, legally, the master still owned it all, but in practice, the slave could use it. And this was a potential game changer, because a resourceful slave could save up their peculium and use it to literally buy their own freedom from their master. This act of freeing a slave was called manumission, and there were three, official, ironclad ways to do it. You could do the vindicta, which was a public ceremony in front of a judge. You could use censu, which was as simple as adding the slave's name to the official citizen list. Or you could use testamento, just freeing a slave in your will. But, there were also less formal ways to do it. A master could just declare it in front of friends, send a letter, or later on announce it in a church. These weren't as legally solid, but they gave what's called de facto freedom, which just means, in reality, you were living and acting as a free person. Okay, so we've talked about the power over slaves. Now let's pivot to something just as absolute, but totally different: the power a father had over his own family. This is patria potestas. So get this. In any Roman family, there was only one person who was sui juris, one person with ultimate legal authority. Just one. And that was the pater familias, the oldest living male ancestor. Everyone else, his sons, his grandsons, and all their families, was legally under his power. And this quote really drives home how extreme this was. This power didn't end when a kid turned 18. It lasted for the father's entire life. I mean, just think about that for a second. A 50-year-old high-ranking senator could still be under the complete legal control of his 80-year-old dad. The sheer scope of this power is just staggering. Early on, a father had life and death power over his children. He could literally sell them into bondage. Any property his kids earned automatically belonged to him. He controlled who they married. And just like with slavery, while these powers were eventually toned down, that foundation of absolute authority was always there. And if you want to see just how strong this patria potestas was, look no further than the bizarre ritual for adoption. To legally transfer a son to a new family, his father had to perform a fake sale, not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. Only after that third sale was the original bond of power considered broken, so the new father could then claim him. It was this whole legal performance just to sever this almost unbreakable tie. So, centuries later, in the 6th century AD, the Emperor Justinian finally stepped in and simplified things. He got rid of that whole 3-sale performance, and he added a rule that honestly seems like total common sense to us. An adopter had to be at least 18 years older than the person they were adopting to make sure it reflected a real parent-child relationship. Okay, so we've been deep in this ancient legal world, a world of absolute power over slaves and even over children. It feels so far away, right? But why should we care about it today? Because these fundamental ideas, they didn't just puff into smoke. They evolved. Think about it. The legal relationship between a master and a servant, well, that's kind of the ancient blueprint for modern employment law. The whole idea of an employee acting as an agent for their employer has these distant echoes in how a Roman master was on the hook for contracts made by his slave using that peculium. So that leaves us with this final thought. When we think about our own lives, the authority of a boss at work, or the legal responsibilities of a parent, are we just seeing the faint ghosts of Dominia Potestas and Patria Potestas? It really makes you wonder, right? How much of our world is still standing on those ancient Roman foundations?